You can buy old mountain bikes for not a lot of money now. Like this old downhill bike, you can get this for a couple £100 or dollars or something like eBay or from a friend. Maybe it's been lying in his shed for 15 years. So this is how to check over an old bike and then how to restore it to get it back onto the trails. So this is a GT downhill iDrive from the year 2000. Yep, it's a very old bike, but this could be a really good bike for someone who maybe only rides downhill a few times a year, just to keep in the shed. You're not going to lose any money on it. So here's a list of a few things that you need to check ideally before you buy the bike to make sure you're not going to have to throw too much money at it. Let's start with the suspension. So the first thing to do is just push on that suspension. So grab your front brake, push that fork down. And I'm really trying to feel how smooth it is and if it's making much noise. And actually, the fork does feel a little bit notchy as I push it down. I can hear a bit of sucking going on. So I think the fork would probably need a service ideally. Whereas the shock feels pretty good. It's nice and smooth, feels nice and plush actually for a 17-year-old shock. And I'd also check there's some rebound control on that, which there is. Same on the fork. If it's actually popping back and sort of topping out, making a noise, springing back really quickly, well, first thing I would do is just wind the rebound control in and see if that makes any difference. And if it doesn't, that means that shock is blown or the fork is blown. That definitely doesn't really tend to happen so much nowadays on modern suspension, but in the olden days, like these shocks, they would blow occasionally. So next, take an actual close look at the suspension. The shock actually looks fine, it feels fine. The fork, you can see there's some pretty big damage down here on the paint, but actually there's no dents or anything, so that's just cosmetic really. However, up on the stanchions, you see they're very scratched up here. It's definitely something you see a lot in the UK on uplifts for downhill bikes, there's scratches all over them. But also you can see a bit of oil is coming out and sitting on that stanchion, and on the seal you can see where oil is stuck to dust. So that right hand leg doesn't look very good. It's not going to be that easy to buy a stanchion from a 2000 Boxer, so if I was buying this bike, I'd definitely think about maybe trying to knock that person down, because you might need to buy a new fork for this bike. So there's a couple more checks I can do to my suspension. I already know that that fork leg is a little bit damaged, but I'm just going to check the bushes in the fork as well. So I'll pull my front brake and just rock the bike back and forth, almost like checking your headset, but now you're looking for any movement in this part of the fork. There's bushes in there that can wear out, and that means this stanchion will start wobbling around. And actually this feels pretty tight. I can't feel any movement in the headset or down in that fork, so that's probably all right for now. And on the rear end, I'm going to check the linkage by just trying to wobble the bike. So I'm holding the saddle in one hand, rear wheel in the other, and really feeling for any movement if I flex it back and forth. You might feel some in the rear wheel, but actually that feels really solid. So I would think these bearings are in pretty good condition, and also the rear wheel is nice and stiff. Now it's time to get out my bike cleaner and brush, give this bike a really good clean, take off 17 years worth of dirt, and actually give the frame a really good check. Right, so with the bike clean, it doesn't look that clean to be fair, it's covered in years worth of stickers and scratches. But what I'm really going to do now is check out the sort of most important parts. This is an old aluminium frame, so go around, definitely the head tube and the swing arm, just to take a really close look. Paint damage is alright, of course, doesn't look that great, but you really don't want to see a crack on that weld. Also, actually, I can see there's an FSA Pig headset in this bike. That was an old trick. They're really deep headsets, so some bikes like this, the head tubes are actually ovallised, so your bottom headset cup would roll around in there. These Pigs were really far extended, so they kept it nice and tight, but obviously it does tell me that this head tube is probably a little bit ovallised. The final thing I'd check, ideally before buying the bike, is the wheels. So give them a spin, see how straight they are. Actually pretty good for that front one. I'll do the same with the back. Another thing to consider is if they're old wheels with alloy nipples, they can start breaking on you. So if you do need to start tweaking the wheels, changing spoke tensions, they can start breaking, and that can be a nightmare. I mean, you'd have to replace the nipples for the whole wheel probably. These are all brass ones, so they're pretty much indestructible, so I'm fine there. Just also check the rim for any sort of dings or any cracks, and that looks pretty good. Obviously I've got disc brakes, so they don't have to be perfectly straight. I've got some old wheels in here, of course. I've got a Hope Biggin on the front, so just bear in mind that sometimes old wheels you might struggle to get new bearings for. Having said that, Hope are really good with their old stuff. They've actually hooked me up already with a new old stock brake for this bike, so that's a Mono M4. So Hope are one of those people that actually keep spares for their really old stuff, but not everyone does that. So actually, quite surprisingly for an old downhill bike like this, the wheels seem in really good condition. Yes, a little bit scratched, but almost straight, and the spoke tension seems really good, so don't need to do too much of that. I have already put some new tyres on this. I say new, there are some old ones from my garage, but they're in decent condition. Bear in mind that an older bike like this is 26-inch wheels, so you might find that the tyres are getting harder and harder to come by. So the bearings also spin pretty well on that rear hub as well, so I'm going to leave that for now. It might be a job I need to do in the future, but for now it's fine. So now moving on to other checks. So going to the bottom bracket, I can feel if I rock, you can probably see that, is the bottom bracket's moving, so both cranks are moving at the same time, so I know nothing's loose in there. It's the bottom bracket that's worn. So it's spinning okay, but it's just worth bearing in mind that, you know, I don't know how far you want to get into this. If you want your bike to feel like new, you're definitely going to have to replace that bottom bracket. For me, it's a bit of a hacker bike. It doesn't have to be perfect. I can live with that for the time being, and just I'll think about replacing that bottom bracket sometime not too far in the distant future. Of course, double check that your cranks are nice and tight. These are ones you had in an 8mm Allen key on both sides. I am going to do a full bolt check on the bike at the end, but definitely whilst I'm here, I'll check that crank's nice and tight. So coming forward on the bike to the headset, just rotate your bars around and feel on that head tube for any sort of grinding in there. It feels surprisingly smooth, so this bike's obviously been pretty well looked after. So again, I could get into this and take everything off and lube that up, but for now, actually that feels pretty good. I'm not going to worry too much about that. Moving on to things like the brakes, I've already talked about them a little bit already. I've got a brand new old stock rear brake. The thing is with brakes, again, like the hubs, they can be quite hard to find the spares if they're very old. And if you're pulling on the lever and it feels like there's a lot of friction in there, or it's not rebounding very quickly, that could mean there's a problem down in the caliper, so the pistons can seize. And that's definitely now worth thinking about, you know, weighing up the cost of that. Actually, it can be quite a lot of work to pop out those pistons, find the replacement, find a service kit for replacing the seals in the caliper, when actually you can get a fairly new set of hydraulic brakes for not a lot of money now. So that's up to you. Think about, are you going to try and fix that old brake, or maybe just buy a new cheap one? So I would always expect to replace the gear cables on an old bike. It's just one of those things that always needs doing. Now check the drivetrain. You can use a specialist chain checker like this, but this really depends on how old the bike is and how well it's been looked after. I'll use this chain checker anyway, and this is telling me that at 0.75 it says replace, and I'm well over that, so I'm 1.0, so I definitely need a new chain and probably a new drivetrain on this bike. You don't want it slipping around, so I'm going to price that up. So one of the final things I'm going to do, and it will seem quite tedious, is actually remove the bolts of this bike one by one and just check so that's actually really dry. So I'm going to re-grease that and put it back in, because I know it sounds like a very tedious thing to do, but if you find any of these old bolts get stripped or they get stuck in there and snap, it can be an absolute nightmare. Especially on this fork, these notoriously bad, the old boxes. I've had these old axle seize in there, so obviously again it depends on the previous owner how well they've looked after the bike, but try and get some grease into these bolts as much as you can. And then I'm going to do a full bolt check front to back on the bike to make sure everything's nice and tight, and then the bike is ready to ride. So what I didn't tell you at the start of the video is actually this is my old bike that I raced in the year 2000 at World Cup Downhill that I sold to a friend. I've just got it back, and coming up soon on the channel I'll be riding this bike, so keep your eyes peeled for that one. If you want to see some more videos, click up there for a video with Doddy, how to check out a second-hand bike and fix it up. Click down there for how to replace your drivetrain. Click on the logo to subscribe if you haven't done already, and give us a thumbs up if you like retro bikes.